Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the SBK betting podcast, a week of controversy in horse racing. The last time we spoke, we were waiting for three equine stars to be unleashed on the track. And unfortunately, they weren't running because of ground conditions. So we have had a week of interesting comments, and it has been one where we have moaned about the fact that our state of our ground has meant that we can't run our horses, and it is a shame, but we're lucky to see that a couple of them are going to reappear this weekend instead, and we could spend this whole podcast discussing the week that was, but we will instead revel in the glory of Ross's winners. Last week he was on fire. Botax has a 10-1 winner of the Stayers race at Haydock and his winning nap Coquelet at 4-1. So I know that, Ross, you've got plenty of things to say from the weekend that's gone by, but we're going to revel in that glory instead. Well done to you. A wonderful weekend of winners.
It was a nice weekend of winners, Jess, and it was nice to see Team Moore with a big winner. I think they're exceptionally likeable people, and it's always nice in the sport to see emerging talent. And I thought Caelan Quinn gave Botox has such a cool ride from the front. You know, he's pretty experienced for his claim, but even so, I think that would have been the biggest race he's ridden in, and just impressed me hugely. He was in the right place the whole way, and the horse always going to stay. He used his confirmed stamina, and yeah, it's just nice to see nice people do well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Lovely interviews with Gary Moore as well, and that big weekend double, obviously with Goshen as well. Right, we're going to head into this weekend and look at the Corach Gold Cup at Newbury. And as I said, I hate to moan about anything, as we have had a lot of negativity this week. But I have to say that I think the quality in this race has lacked somewhat in recent years. I'm delighted we have a festival winner in the shape of Corach Rambler in here. But the horse that came down in this last year, Remastered, has to be one of the leading chances, just shows that it does really lack a real showcase. I hope there'll be something a bit more fresh kid on the block style to get us excited, or a true graded horse carrying a bit of weight. And obviously we do have Fanny and Destraval, but we are lacking on Willie Mullins runners, and obviously we do have a 16 runner field led by Threeunderthrufive, and I said that festival winner in Corach Rambler. But really looking through this, it's not a vintage renewal, and it's a shame. I don't know what it could be. Ross, I'm looking at you. Is it prize money? Is it ground? Is it the big handicaps outside of the Cheltenham meeting at all just not being supported as they once were? But this just really doesn't look like a race of its old for me.
No, sort of the old Hennessy was brilliant, wasn't it? Because you often had sort of second season novice coming through on the road to Gold Cup success. Sometimes I think it's probably a factor of all those things you mentioned: prize money, ground, a diminishing horse population. Plenty of the good horses aren't in this country, yeah, I think all of those. I think it'll be a competitive race, but I don't think it'll be a vintage race. That's for certain.
Yeah, I think you're right, spot on about the horses not being in this country. It's good to see Joseph O'Brien bring Busselton over, but that's the true Irish player. Obviously, Willie Mullins had 3 in this race last year. Perhaps his horses aren't just ready yet. You get the sense that he's just waiting for them. But Tom, you know, as Ross says, it is a competitive race. We saw a big double price figure runner winner in this last year. Can you see something outside of the obvious, or does this appeal to you from the top of the betting?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious is probably Remastered. Now, I know you said he came down last year, but he was going to probably win that race when he unfortunately took a massive heavy fall as well. It was a really bad fall, so it was just fingers crossed that he got up, and he did, and he's raced since. And, you know, he's shown that he still retains that ability. Based on last year's effort, you would say he is probably the most likely winner. Corach Rambler comes back off a seasonal reappearance, one at the Cheltenham Festival last year, has that class edge. But outside of those, you're kind of looking at handicappers that generally pit their wits at a lower level. I think there are a couple in here that are interesting at slightly bigger prices. The first is Milos, who's going to be my number 1 selection in the race. Now, I always thought that Tim Vaughan, who previously trained Milos, never really got to the bottom of this horse, because one day he would show up and win and be really impressive, post an RPR in the mid-140s, and we think, yeah, this horse is now ready to take a step up to the next level. And then the next day he'd come back and finish last of 8. And it was really difficult to assess where Milos was in his career. However, what we saw last year when he was still with Tim Vaughan was that he improved dramatically to be when he stepped up to 3 miles. 3 miles clearly brought out that extra key to Milos, and subsequently moved to Dan Skelton. Well, we know what that kind of stable switch has done in the past. He produced a really impressive display at Bangor on his reappearance. I mean, he didn't jump very well. He made a really bad mistake down the back. He just dived at one. Harry asked for a big one, and Milos didn't really pick up. But he instantly refound his stride, and he cruised through that race. He looked like a horse that was well capable of performing at a much higher level than he was. Now, he beat Lord de Maynil by 4 lengths, and if you look at that race on paper, you'd be thinking, well, that's probably not good enough to win a Hennessy. But at the same time, Milos is open to a lot of improvement, and he's still £4 well in off a mark of 146. The other horse I like in here, and I don't want to steal Ross's thunder because I've got a feeling he's also going to mention this horse, is Ansam. He's a double figure price. I think he's a good each way play in this race. His form figures first time up read 5-6-F-4-8. He would have needed his reappearance run last time out. Just put a line through that. I thought he ran perfectly fine in the London Gold Cup. They'd have primed him for this race. He hacked up at Newbury last year in a much weaker and smaller field event, but it was impressive nonetheless. And I think he's got a good each way chance for Evan Williams, who's a good shrewd trainer with just 10 stone 5 on his back. So Milos and Ansam for me, Jess.
Okay, Ansam, definitely going to ask Ross about this because he's been a real friend to the podcast in the past. A quick one on Milos with the ground officially good as it is, and looking at his prior form from Frenchals, would that be a concern for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little concern, but Harry Skelton and Dan Skelton tend to get the horses ready for good ground or good to soft ground during the early season. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a huge negative. It's a little unknown, but at the same time, I expect him to handle it.
Yeah, where I'm sitting at the moment in London, it's pretty dry and sunny. And as we know, last week, the ground dries out very quickly in these Southern England tracks. Ross, we mentioned Ansam. We've talked about the quality in this race. Am I being unfair? Is there a horse in here that could be Gold Cup quality in due course, and that this is a stepping stone to that, or is this their Gold Cup as it would be?
I mean, be careful what you say with horses because they will surprise you. That there's not a chance there's a Gold Cup horse in this field. Not a chance.
And that's a haunt you. That
I think it is I think it is a real handicap. So as TC said, I do like Ansam. I like Evan Williams' yard. They're quite hard to get hold of at times, but I think sometimes you can see they've lined themselves up for one from a fair way out, and I think this has certainly been the case with Ansam. Really, probably the best handicapped horse in the race. He won the Howden Silver Cup at Ascot last year off a mark of 134. He was getting £3 from Phoenix Way. He was 4 lengths back, but Phoenix Way is now 145 rated. You know, I just think he's off 137, very well handicapped. He'll like this good ground, and plenty aren't. I mean, I personally think Milos is going to get taken off his feet. All his form is on heavy ground. He's fundamentally a slow stayer. I think you're going to have to travel in the early part of the race for this. You couldn't just stand by Ansam alone, though, because he can jump sketchily at times. I think you'll know your fate with him fairly early. If he gets into a rhythm, you've got a good chance of him delivering his race, but he can jump fairly averagely at times. Remastered, I tipped him last year and was very happy going to 4 out, and I think it was Fergal Gillard's inexperience that put him on the floor, to be fair, but I was very confident in hindsight that he was going to stay comfortably, and I followed him all the way through the rest of the season to my cost, because he looked a non-stayer a couple of times at Haydock, had wind surgery after that, still looked a non-stayer, had subsequent wind surgery in the summer, and ran very well at Aintree over hurdles. But that was off an £11 lower mark, and it was over 3 miles. He has got to go an extra quarter of a mile here. At 6-1, he might well be the horse that I thought he was last year. But he's still, for me, got to go and prove he stays. So I can avoid him at the prices. Fiddler on the Roof, I think we should mention him. He was a really good second last year, but that came off a mark of 150. I think last year's race was deeper, albeit that actually a horse that beat him probably wasn't the ones that I considered to be a solid player. He's now off 155. I think that is a fairly big ask. So the other one I came down on, I mentioned him ante-post in the Ultimate podcast we did previewing the season, is Our Power for Sam Thomas. It's a bit of a shame and a for me, a negative that Charlie Deutsch isn't on him. That's no slight to Sam Twiston-Davie. It's just I'm a big fan of Charlie Deutsch, and I think he gets on with this horse in particular, gets him into a rhythm. His form of his win at Ascot is looking really good. Papa Boutini was 5th, 17 lengths behind him, was 2nd last week at Haydock. He's got plenty of pace, this horse. He's won over 2 mile 4, and he will love this good ground. I thought the Ultima Chase is decent form. He's got a bit of distance to find with Corach Rambler. I think he's £4 better off, and he was beaten 11 lengths, but he lost ground turning in at Cheltenham. He got bumped back and finished really well. And the run that really caught my eye was last year at Kempton, where he finished very wide on the track, but really flew home. I think he's going to love this trip. I think he could be over 4 miles later in the season. I really do. I love this horse. I wish Charlie Deutsch was on. Sam Twiston-Davies is a decent replacement. I probably won't go in again at the prices because I'm on ante-post, but I think he's got to be, if you've not got him on side, you need to get him on side before the weekend.
Yeah, interestingly, Al Power has only ran at Newbury the once. So I do think it really will suit him as a track. He's obviously got plenty going for him, but as a track, he's only ran there once before. That was back in 2018. Wayne Hutchinson was still riding the juvenile hurdle, which he won. So you'd imagine that it'll really benefit him. And as you say, Charlie Deutsch not riding, but he'll be up at Newcastle, and Sam Twiston-Davies has been his second best plenty of times. A really good case there for Our Power, currently around 10 to 1. Milos is 8 to 1, and Sam 16 to 1. Ross has touched on Fiddler on the Roof, and I think quite right, £5 rise compared to last year when he was second is hefty. The yard was going through quite a quiet patch then. I think it was a really solid run, but Joe Tizard, now obviously the full license holder, he started off really strongly. Fiddler on the Roof, the one benefit that I love about him, he's a very sound jumper of a fence. Brendan Powell rides Newbury very well. Interestingly, they've got the cheap pieces on for the first time. This is the kind of horse that just pitches up in these kind of races and always runs a blinder, in the national. And I really like him as a horse in this kind of race. I'm also going to throw in Lord Accord, who's come back this season in fine form with a win at Cheltenham and a second to Frodon in the Badger Beers. I like his front running tactics for a race like this. By Yates, who another produces fine fence jumpers, and he's a stayer, and you definitely got to stay normally because we see it as a bit of a slog, but it will be pretty decent ground on Saturday for these horses. So that's the Corach Gold Cup, which plays out on Saturday. There's plenty of racing throughout the course of the weekend over in Ireland as well, but the real talking race will be the Fighting Fit Fifth, and we'll touch on this but it will see Constitution Hill, we hope, run if the ground doesn't get any quicker. It can't have firm in it, according to Nicky Henderson. It's good soft at the moment. Tom, as I said, as a betting proposition, not really much. You do have the winners from last year reopposing to take on Constitution Hill. Obviously, Epatante does get that weight sway, so you think that might just help her. But it sounds like what they're talking, Tom, that this horse is just more electric this year than he was last.
Yeah, well, Constitution Hill just isn't in the same league as Epatante. He's way above. Epatante's a very good mare, don't get me wrong, but Constitution Hill is probably one of the best hurdlers and actually rated one of the best novice hurdlers we've ever seen. I think the best, actually. So they shouldn't be in the same league. I mean, Newcastle aren't going to let the ground get firm or have firm in the description. Constitution Hill should have run 7 days ago. Before he was obviously planned to run 7 days ago, didn't happen. That's kind of thrown his schedule off a little, but I think he'll run on Saturday. He'll win. It should be a cakewalk. Epatante in second.
I think considering where they are, it's great to see them race against each other, but Epatante's going to have to massively improve, you'd imagine, considering what Constitution Hill did and the times he put in. But as we said last week, Ross, he's still got to prove himself in open company. You love to say this, it's a horse race, anything can happen. And I'm just pleased that Not So Sleepy, the Hugh Morrison team are brave enough to run in this, because you need a horse like this just to make it a little bit more entertaining.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a race to be watched, and the vibes coming out of Seven Barrows are that he's taken another step forward. Well, if we get to all see that, I'm happy enough. I think he's the most exciting horse in the country. and let's hope he takes a big step forward. You'd like to see him win comfortably. I'd like to see him win on this good ground on a flatter track. I think that's to everyone's benefit, and hopefully it's the first step forward, and no one's got anything to grumble about.
Yeah, totally. It's a shame that Pied Piper isn't a runner. Gordon Elliott was had him in, but didn't want to take on Constitution Hill and Epatante, which is slightly bizarre considering most of the time the Irish have no qualms about taking on our horses, are pretty happy to do it. But that just goes to show the level that even the Irish have respect for Constitution Hill. So I thought that was really intriguing, because normally of all people, Gordon Elliott is pretty happy to take on our horses. So that is the fighting fifth. Let's hope that everyone remains in. As I said, there are a couple of the horses that we were meant to see last week are due to run this weekend, including L'Empresse as well. So we will hopefully have full fields, no walkovers, good competitive racing. We're going to go into the bet of the week and next best as well. But before we do so, here is a reminder that there are a number of excellent podcasts going out on the SBK podcast platforms at the moment. Obviously, it is the World Cup. We've seen some spectacular results, especially for the underdogs, which we all love to see. And not only do we have a regular SBK World Cup podcast with Gary Pallister and Lee Sharp, but there is also a weekly NFL podcast with the one and only TC. He records it with Nat Coombs. Okay, on to best of the week from Ross. This is definitely your moment to shine, as you've shone for the last few weekends. So what have you got for us?
So the nap is in the 2:30 at Newbury. A horse I think is probably the best handicap novice hurdler in the country, and that's Picard from the Skelton yard. He had really good form in novice hurdles last year without winning. Finished a length behind Nappers Hill on debut at Chepstow. Nappers Hill is now 153. He was 9 lengths behind John Bon at Haydock. You all know what John Bon's gone on to do. And he was 3 lengths behind I Like to Move It when falling at the last at Cheltenham. He returned with a win at Chepstow in novice hurdles, because without his win, he was eligible for novices again this year, with a really easy win. 5 lengths back. In third was Mr. Chewy, who I think we can all say was going to win at Ascot last week, but for tipping up. He runs off a mark of 127 here. He is comfortably better than that mark. He'll like the ground. He'll like the long home straight at Newbury. I think he's going to take all the beating in the 2:30, the Jerry Fielden.
I wonder if 10.9 might be the lowest that Harry Skelton does. It seems like a pretty low weight, and you would do it for a horse like this, you'd think.
Absolutely. I think he doesn't do much lighter, that's for certain. I think they've got this horse very well handicapped. He's got plenty of experience. I think he's a real smart prospect. Okay,
Picard for best bet, and next best. We'll stick with you, Ross.
Next best, I go away from the big stage to Bangor for the 3:13. The Kim Bailey trained Gallant de Rome. Really caught my eye at Foss Lass on her first run this season. Got very badly outpaced over 2 miles, but stayed on really well. Under less than forceful riding, it has to be said. Certainly, I think it was Kieran Gethings was on board at the time, made very sure that she jumped properly over the final 2. She finished 9 lengths behind a horse called Rathgall Hill, Sam Drinkwaters, who I think is a very smart prospect. She's ridden by Kai Lenehan in this, who's really impressed me, winning 3 times from Gerard Mentor, who's doing him actually, and David Bass, and a good few have tried. She steps up now on handicap debut from 2 miles up to 3 miles. I think that's quite telling. She's from a stamina-laden family. I think she's really chucked here off a mark of 97, and I expect her to go very close under a promising young rider.
Okay, well, we had a lot of success with Ross's selections last weekend, so best of luck, and some really interesting thoughts there around your next best too. Okay, Tom, I'm going to let you roll with your bet of the week, your next best, and your stat attack, please.
Cool. Do you want, Barney, we're going for a whole hat trick all in one go. I don't think it's ever happened on the pod before. Right. So I've been living in Ross's shadow for the last 2 weeks. Ross, phenomenal tipping, me not so on the jump. So I'm switching to the all-weather, back to something I know very well, Jess. The nap is going to be Rare Edition in the 12:40 at Doncaster. He ran really well in a couple of points. He finished 4th first time up behind a horse called St. Davy, who's now with John Joe O'Neill and is unbeaten under rules. Second time up, he ran second behind Kalanisi Star at Corbet House. Kalanisi Star won on bumper debut in Ireland, beating a horse called Monbeg Park, who has also subsequently won. So the point form is working out really nice. Rare Edition was then purchased for £450,000 at the Cheltenham sales. He made his debut for Charlie Longston in a bumper, beating a horse called It's So Fury. Now, It's So Fury is 2 from 2 for John Joy No Under Rules. Again, the form working out well. And then last time out, over hurdles, Rare Edition bolted up at a short price in a really weak race. He won with head and chest. It was just a piece of work. He gets some kind of opposition this time, but I think he's miles better than them. I think he's a graded horse running in novice company, and you should be backing him in the 1240 at Doncaster. Should we go on to the Stat Attack?
I think we must do. You're on a roll there, Tom.
Cool, Stat Attack. I like this one as well, because it's something that people have been pushing on social media and that I've been trying to mention as well. Everyone was highlighting how bad Venetia Williams' form was coming into the last week or so. She had failed to get a winner for over 200 days. Her horses just weren't running well at all. She was having a couple of place runners eventually, but previous to that, they were all running like drains. It was terrible to see. But in the last week, she's had 4 winners. She's starting to fire again. And now she's sending some horses to Newbury, something which you should always follow. Venetia Williams with chasers at Newbury over the last 5 years, 27%, 7 winners from 26 runners. Those selections, if you put £1 on each one of them, you'd have a level stakes profit of plus £39.75. Really good statistic there for Venetia Williams with chasers at Newbury. I think she has 4 running on Saturday. It might be less though, because I haven't looked after declarations. But her 4 originally were Pink Legend in the 120, Chambard and Fanyon Destravaux in the 305, and Brave Siaska in the 340.
Yeah, good to see Venetia hitting a bit of form, seeing her in the winners' enclosure, and she looks to just about to turn a little bit of a corner, and a nice Stat Attack to prove that. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in for my best bet, my next best. Mr. Coffee in the 120 at Newbury. He's a bit of an enigma. Sometimes he wants to be good, sometimes he wants to be bad. And I'm hoping that he'll be on good form at Newbury this Saturday. He can, if he wants to, jump a fence really well. If you go back to his Kimure run, he was a good second in that race at Cheltenham. He just showed how he can get he can really run a big one. James Bowen's on board this time as Nico's at Newcastle. James can really get the best out of horses and really make them put their best foot forward. The only time that they run together didn't work out that well, but I think he's learning. He's a really big, gangly looking horse last season. I'd like to hope that he's kind of filled into himself a little bit more, and this could be his season to really find him. My next best is Malacana in the 155 at Newbury. This is a horse I still think is really well handicapped on the over jumps. She's been just phenomenal on the flat this season. She's a horse that I think is still slightly underrated for Ian Williams. She's really fit and fresh from those excursions on the flat. The last 2 wins have been to show how gutsy she is, but she's been really interesting since they put the cheap pieces on her, and I think that she can run a big race at Newbury in the handicap hurdle, where this race could have a good horse and walking on air. He could be still well handicapped, but he still has to give weight away to Malacana. So those are the best bets and the next best. I'm going to quickly just run through the Coral Gold Cup selections. Our Power and Ansam for Ross. For Tom, we've got Milos and Ansam, and I've gone for Fiddler on the Roof and Lord Accord. So best of luck for the big one this weekend. And a reminder that new SBK customers can get £30 in free bets by betting £10. T's and C's always apply. Please remember to subscribe to whichever podcast channel you listen to. We're also on YouTube as well, where you can see our pretty little faces. But as we said, for the World Cup, there's plenty of other podcast content if you're enjoying your football at the moment. So make sure to rejoin us next week, and have a very good weekend.